Further debate. I recognize the member for Oshawa.
Speaker, and I'm pleased to be able to add a full hour's worth of what I hope are thoughtful comments on G212, which is the so-called Reducing Gridlock, Saving You Time Act, as presented by the government. I have the opportunity to serve as the official opposition critic for infrastructure, transportation and highways, and I have a whole bunch of stuff that I'm looking forward to getting on the record and sharing about this bill. This is a piece of legislation that has certainly garnered a fair bit of attention and interest as we have headed back to Queen's Park. Some folks will know that this is the bill about bike lanes, about supposedly reducing gridlock. It isn't a bill about a subterranean expressway or 401 if folks are waiting for that. That's not this bill. But Speaker, this is a bill that seeks to bypass various due diligence and environmental assessment processes in order to fast-track costly and unnecessary highways through the Greenbelt, while making it harder for municipalities to provide and ensure cycling infrastructure. This bill also makes permanent the existing restricted tow zone pilot. We've talked about the towing industry in this House before, and also touches on broadband, so I'm going to break that down for us in an hour. So this government has named this bill the Reducing Gridlock, Saving You Time Act. If that were really the goal, the government could take the trucks off the 401, move them to the 407 to reduce gridlock, but they have voted against that NDP initiative. The government could ensure truck drivers have appropriate training to reduce collisions on northern roads, but so far they seem to be pretending that that isn't the terrible problem that it is. They could ensure transit gets built. They could turf the notorious CEO of Metrolinx, Phil Verster, and commit to more transparent and accountable building of needed transit infrastructure. But this legislation, I would say, Speaker, is not about improving traffic. Instead of solving problems, it picks around the edges of existing legislation. It does tighten up a few things, seeks to advance the government's commitment to, appears, its donors, and seeks to pick a culture war for political purposes that puts the lives and safety of vulnerable road users at risk, including kids and people who cannot afford a car. It is about a government dictating that people who choose to get around by bike are worth less than people who choose to drive by car. If this bill were really about getting people moving, it would be a commitment to finishing the Eglinton LRT and diverting commercial truck traffic off the 401 and onto the 407. The government talks about prioritizing infrastructure, and yet we're seeing will not invest in the professional engineers within the public service that Ontarians depend on to ensure our infrastructure is safe and reliable. This is not a bill about traffic. It's about starting, as I said, starting a culture war and a nonsensical fight against bike lanes. This is a fight the government is waging without evidence, as I will lay out for us in this time. The government is making grand claims about driving test savings, which aren't real. But what is real is the Auditor General's scathing report that the government is not addressing real concerns and real fraud. If the government were interested in reducing gridlock, they would not be so focused on gumming up the works with new red tape for municipalities. Speaker, Schedule 2 of this bill, the Building Highways Faster Act, designates Highway 413, the Bradford Bypass, the Garden City Skyway Bridge, and any other highway project prescribed by Cabinet as, quote, priority highway projects. I'll get the nitty-gritty on the record, and then we'll explain it for the folks at home. But this Schedule 2, the minister may order utilities to move their infrastructure to make way for a priority highway project. The minister or a delegate may enter any non-dwelling property to carry out a site inspection. The minister may, by regulation, deem that certain municipal bylaws, to the extent they restrict the delivery of goods and services to a priority highway project, do not apply. The government already has extraordinary powers to expropriate property or conduct site inspections. I don't know if there is evidence, we certainly haven't seen any, that it needs these additional powers. Is this just another power grab that seeks to avoid public accountability? I'm looking forward to the debate. Schedule 3 is the Highway 413 Act, and again, I'll wade into the details here. It exempts the Highway 413 project from the Environmental Assessment Act, ending the EA that has been underway off and on since 2007. The Highway 413 project is defined broadly to include highway connections to Highway 410 and Highway 427. Highway 413 early works, so that would include specified bridge and ramp projects, are also exempt. And the Act sets out an alternative environmental impact assessment and consultation process for these exempted projects. So Schedule 3 fast-tracks various projects related to Highway 413, well, that project, by weakening or removing important safeguards that protect the public and the environment from the costs of harmful or wasteful projects. There is no requirement to publish the estimated costs of any part of the Highway 413 project or to provide a business case for proposed highway investments to confirm the value for money. There is no specific requirement to study the impacts on traffic or trip times, including the impacts of induced demand. There is no specific requirement to study impacts on species at risk. All of those things one would expect to find with a project of this size and scope. The Act requires that the minister state the purpose of the Highway 413 project, but does not require the minister to evaluate alternatives to achieve the same purpose, as would be required for a full environmental assessment under the EA Act. The alternative environmental impact process described in Schedule 3 of this bill is carried out by the Ministry of Transportation or its consultants. There is no requirement that the impact assessment, including its terms of reference, be reviewed by subject matter professionals in the Environment Ministry, the Agricultural Ministry, or other relevant ministries. Speaker, the building highways faster, as the bill calls it, who is this building faster for? Before proceeding with Highway 413 and the Bradford bypass, is the government going to tell the public how much these mega projects are going to cost them? Because that information has not been forthcoming. This is a government that has so far refused stubbornly to utilize existing infrastructure. We have the 407, and it is underutilized. Back in May, the NDP introduced a motion to remove tolls from trucks on the 407, to move more of them from the 401 to the 407. And everyone who has driven the 401 knows that trucks on the 401 add to the gridlock. So if the government is so convinced that these highways will improve traffic, instead of attracting more cars and making congestion worse, why doesn't this piece of legislation require the ministry to publish a traffic engineering study showing the evidence to back up the government's claims? I would posit, Speaker, that it's because it won't. So let's look at some better and different ideas. This is the Environmental Defence put out a press release. Queen's Park motion to slash 407 truck tolls undermines the Ontario government's business case for Highway 413. So this was back in March when the NDP brought forward the motion to remove the truck tolls from the 407 to direct more of the trucks away from the 401. And they have said, quote, the opposition bill is proposing to reduce tolls on the 407 ETR for commercial truckers, which would help to reduce congestion on the slower-moving Highway 401. According to an expert report by global transportation analyst Eunomia, the transportation benefits would be enormous. Despite costing $6 billion less than the 413 scheme, this plan would shift 12,000 to 21,000 trucks a day off Highway 401 and slash journey times for truck traffic passing through the GTA by approximately 80 minutes. After a decade of legal wrangling and disruptive construction, the benefits of this policy would be felt almost immediately, end quote. Sounds like a good idea. From the Trillium article about the same initiative, PCs vote against NDP motion to remove truck tolls from Highway 407. So again, this is back in March. NDP leader introduced a motion to call for the removal of tolls for trucks on Highway 407, arguing it would ease congestion on the 401 and save truckers tens of thousands of dollars. And again, they've said diverting some truck traffic to the 407 would save truckers about 80 minutes of commute time, get 12,000 to 21,000 trucks off the 401, and cost $6 billion less than building Highway 413, according to a recent study by Environmental Defence. So, Speaker, this is something that we brought forward. We debated in the House, and the government was not interested in exploring. Certainly not in supporting, but I mean, I have tried to have this current Minister of Transportation talk about the idea in the legislature, and even that seems to be a bridge too far. But there are other ideas out there that this province could look into if they're, if they're absolutely committed to their current highway plans. What is preventing them from looking at other alternatives at the same time? Because if I believed, which I don't, but if I believed that the Highway 413 was going to change the world and make it a traffic-free space or whatever, if it was going to just improve the lives of Ontarians so much, if that were true, it still isn't going to happen anytime soon. And removing trucks from the 401, diverting them to the 407 by removing the truck tolls would be something we could do tomorrow. So, putting off any kind of relief for people until that highway is built, if I believe that that's what it would do, which I don't, is poor government, right? Governing for the people, what do they need today, what do they need tomorrow, what do they need in the future? Let's look at all of those things, and yet we're not. So again, this bill claims to build highways faster, but I don't believe that that's a thing that's going to happen, especially because I think that this Premier should engineer a believable and better plan. And yes, Speaker, there was a pun in there, because right now a lot of people are interested in what's going on with the professional engineers in the public service. And they're engineers. Engineers are a special breed of people. Anybody who has engineers in their friend group know that they see the world differently, and we need them. They imagine potential possibilities, how to make the world better designed. We need them, and we should value them. If building infrastructure were really a priority for this Premier, then this government would be investing in the planning and design of great projects for the province. But instead, we get back-of-the-napkin pipe dreams like the 401, or whatever we're calling it, the subterranean 401 tunnel. Right now, for the first time in 35 years, the engineers who work in the public service are taking strike action. This is unbelievable, but it's happening because this Premier wants to cheap out on paying for professional services to ensure our infrastructure is the best it can be to serve Ontarians for generations to come. I see it as short-sighted. Speaker, this is from an article by Global News. Ontario engineers plan to remove members from Highway 413 and Bradford bypass projects. The Professional Engineers Government of Ontario Union, or PEGO, which represents engineers who work on oversight and management of government projects and regulations, say they are planning to begin pulling their members from work related to Highway 413 and the Bradford bypass, two key government projects. Quote, while this labour dispute will impact the delivery of Ontario's key infrastructure commitments and the management of existing infrastructure and operations, PEGO is ensuring its strike is both tightly focused and responsible, end quote, the union said in a statement. The latest move means removing its members from projects the government has deemed a provincial priority. The engineers generally work in project management and contract consulting roles with oversight over how quickly the projects can move forward. The union said it was working to remain responsible in how it escalated its protests with safety in mind. Speaker, government is spending what it deems necessary on P3s and private engineers and sees that as an investment, but apparently sees paying their own in-house professional engineers as an expense. And all things being equal, we need engineers wherever they are working, in the private sector and the public sector, to be able to do the work that Ontarians need them to do. And I would say that if the government were really interested in advancing their infrastructure priorities, then they need to not just look in the mirror, but they need to look in-house and make sure that they are indeed investing in infrastructure. Again, this bill, the Building Highways Faster, if the engineers who are overseeing and are involved in the Bradford Bypass and Highway 413 are planning to withdraw their members from that, how quickly is that project going to go, folks? I'll continue here. This was, I guess, from last week, but PEGO, frustrated by lack of progress at the bargaining table. PEGO has provided the Treasury Board with an analysis showing that PEGO members earn at least 30 to 50% less than they could earn in the broader Ontario market for their skills by working for municipalities, other government agencies, or in the private sector. PEGO is deeply concerned about the challenge Ontario faces in recruiting and retaining expert engineering and land surveying staff. Mounting vacancies could result in impacts and delays on key priorities of the government, including Highway 413, the Bradford Bypass, and others, some of which have been recently designated as priority projects for construction. It is important to note that successful construction is a result of strong planning and design work in the early stages of complex infrastructure projects, work that PEGO's engineers and land surveyors are engaged in. Engineers aren't nice to have. They're needed, right? So I would challenge the government to put its focus, if they are indeed interested in building infrastructure. I mean, we can argue about which projects, but any government of the province of Ontario, I hope, wants to build long-lasting, safe, well-planned infrastructure for generations. Prove to us that that is indeed your priority. Further to that, with the engineers, I would ask, why doesn't this Ontario government recognize the value and invest in the engineering and land surveying expertise that is critical to Ontario's infrastructure priorities? Why are these PEGO-represented engineers and land surveyors who work for the province not paid at the same level as other public entities, such as Metrolinx, City of Toronto, Region of Peel, for doing equally or more complex expert work? Let's not forget that the folks in-house sign the papers that they are working for the people of Ontario. That's top of their mind, and we don't want to bleed them to the, I'll say, the outside world where they can make enough money to pay their bills, or rather what's fair for the expertise. Speaking of engineers, the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers has opposed both Highway 413 and the Bradford Bypass, and so I'll share with folks from OSPE Engineers, so the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers, which is the advocacy body and voice of the engineering profession. So Ontario currently has more than 85,000 professional engineers, 250,000 engineering graduates, 6,600 engineering postgraduate students, and 37,000 engineering undergraduate students. And I'm going out on a limb here, but I'm pretty sure that all members of this House get invited to engineering license presentations, that we meet with the engineers locally in our community to celebrate their achievement, their academic success, wish them well in their future. We value the work that they do in word, but I don't know if we do in deed. So this is from a letter that they had written to the Premier at that time, the then Minister of Transportation as well. And they say, last week the Auditor General of Ontario disclosed that there were numerous recommendations from qualified subject matter experts to defer pending highway projects. In April 2021, OSPI echoed the recommendations, strongly opposing the proposed highway projects, specifically Highway 413 and the Bradford Bypass, based on feedback from Ontario's engineering community. OSPI strongly urges the Ontario government to abide by the recommendations of your engineering subject matter experts and defer the highway projects, specifically Highway 413 and the Bradford Bypass, and reinvest that money into higher priority projects. Our network of engineering experts continues to offer valuable information to the Ontario government and is willing to support your government's objectives on an ongoing basis. And that was from Sandro Peruzza, Chief Executive Officer, back in December of 2022. And again, we have a habit here in the I'm not a member of the government. The Government of Ontario seems to have a habit of discounting what engineers are saying, and that's another example, and of course connected to what we're talking about here today. Speaker, while we're discussing Highway 413, let's talk about the environmental ramifications. This Premier wants the 413 and has promised all those lucrative off-ramps connected to it to PC donors and developers. There's lots of articles that folks can check that out and see each off-ramp is owned by a different donor and developer, but there seems to be nothing that can stop this Premier, and certainly not a pesky species at risk, not the community, and arguably not the feds. So I have an article here, Environmental Defence. Ontario's new highway bill would lock in gridlock, strangle low-cost housing development, and set up conflict with federal government. And that is about this particular bill. So we're debating G212, the Reducing Gridlock, Saving You Time Act. And Environmental Defence has, well, we'll get more into that, but they have certainly taken a strong stand and are providing Ontarians with evidence as to why this bill is problematic in so many ways. So as they have said, quote, the Ontario government's Omnibus Highways Bill, which it has labelled the Reducing Gridlock, Saving You Time Act 2024, would bulldoze ahead with destructive new highways that make traffic worse. The bill ignores environmental values, hinders affordable solutions to traffic congestion, undermines efforts to deliver affordable infill housing, and puts the province on a collision course with the federal government. They go on, Ontario could and should be tackling gridlock right now by making better use of existing infrastructure, such as moving commercial truck traffic from the 401 onto the underutilized Highway 407. This shift alone could ease congestion on major routes without further damage to ecosystems or the climate. As they've said, quote, more highways mean more gridlock, more wasted time, more destroyed natural areas, and more pollution, says Tim Gray, Executive Director at Environmental Defence. He goes on to say, quote, shifting truck traffic from the 401 to the 407 now and investing in modern, well-connected public transit would relieve congestion more effectively and sustainably without destroying natural areas and farms or increasing carbon pollution, end quote. By short-circuiting environmental reviews, Ontario is proposing to ignore the fate of dozens of federally protected endangered species, the Humber, Credit, and Holland rivers, and irreplaceable Indigenous archaeological sites. All of these values are the responsibility of the federal government and cannot be destroyed at the stroke of a pen by the Ontario government. They continue to say, quote, the Premier's callous and contemptuous disregard for wildlife, rivers, clean water, and culture cannot be legally ignored by the federal government. added Gray, this bill should be a bright waving red flag for the federal government to immediately designate all new major highways in Ontario for federal impact assessments, as we have requested. There's a lot going on with this bill and a lot at stake, Speaker. As reported by the Narwhal, Canada's Environment Minister has 90 days to decide whether to review Ontario's Highway 413 again. So, Environmental Defence has requested a federal impact assessment on the heels of the provincial bill that we have in front of us, Speaker. And as they have reported October 22nd, an environmental group has made a formal request for the federal government to intervene in Ontario's Highway 413, throwing the project's fate into uncertainty a second time. Canadian Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault is mandated by federal law to reply within 90 days, by January 19th, 2025 at the latest. If he decides to subject the project to a second review called an impact assessment, the project could once again be caught in bureaucratic gridlock. All of this has already happened once before. The federal government originally decided to review Highway 413 in May 2021. At the time, it was about public concern about the project and raised red flags about how its construction could impact 3 federally protected species at risk. The highway would cut across Ontario's Greenbelt, along with wetlands, rivers, forests, and prime farmland in Toronto's outer suburbs. Ontario's Transportation Minister, current one, has vowed to push forward with the highway at all costs, arguing it will ease the Greater Toronto Area's traffic congestion despite decades of evidence showing that new highways don't clear gridlock. Some estimates for the project indicate it could cost up to $10 billion, though the Progressive Conservatives have refused to put a price tag on it. If passed, this bill, the bill, would exempt the project from undergoing a full provincial environmental assessment, Ontario's equivalent to the federal impact assessment. Instead, the province is proposing an accelerated process, which would require a more limited review of the highway's environmental impacts and allow the government to start early works like bridges before completing it. This current minister told reporters that he hopes the federal minister will stay out of the provincial lane on this. So we will wait and see what happens. But exempting it from environmental protections doesn't seem like the right way forward. Speaker, Schedule 4 of this bill is regarding the Highway Traffic Act. There are 2 parts. It reenacts an as-yet undone part of Bill 162, the Get It Done Act, which was to set a statutory driver's license fee at the amount of the current fee set by regulation. Future fee changes will require an amendment to the Highway Traffic Act. It sets statutory fees for certain driver's examinations at the amount of the current fee set by regulation. Future fee changes will require an amendment to the Highway Traffic Act. Speaker, the government has already has the power to set driver's license and examination fees, so setting them via statute instead of regulation won't change a darn thing for drivers. The fact that the statutory driver's license fee from Bill 162 still hasn't been proclaimed 6 months later and no one has noticed or cared is proof of this. I'm more interested, and I'm sure that the folks at home are more interested, in what the government is doing about the allegations of fraud and corruption within Ontario's privatized drive test centres, or the similar allegations of fraud at Ontario's private truck driver training schools. And I'm wondering why the ministry is bullying vulnerable road users instead of tackling these actual problems. But, Speaker, this government is claiming that they're saving Ontarians $72 million. So this is kind of the sticker in the window, right? As you're driving by this bill, you see a flashy sign in the window and it says, you know, we're going to save Ontarians $72 million. Well, let's just take a moment to delve into that. This is just I'll say a small detail, but it's worth discussing because this is what government looks like on the outside. Ooh, $72 million. And here's what it looks like on the inside. $72 million is over a decade. So that's $7.2 million a year for those who pay for a driving test. But the cost is staying the same, so no one's actually saving anything. So right now the test is $90. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's the number I understand it to be. So if the government were considering, hypothetically considering, an increase to $100, then one person would not have to spend an additional $10 whole. Now imagine 720,000 people will pay for a test this year. That's 7.2 million, and then times the 10 years, if you're 72 million. Imagine that rate over 10 years, and that's how the government gets to $72 million worth of savings. That might be $10 per person once in 10 years. However, this government is magnanimously choosing not to implement an increase. I mean, they could have pretended or threatened to increase it to like $1,000. Imagine the hypothetical magical savings that we could extrapolate over a decade or extrapolate over a century. Would be marvelous. You could maybe buy back the 407. Anyway, but this government isn't actually increasing the rates. So whatever imagined savings they're talking about was based on some hypothetical potential increase they've chosen not to levy against drivers. Also, how many times do you take a driving test, Speaker? That's not a personal question you don't have to answer. I'm sure you're a great driver. I don't know. But what if the government, as I said, were pretending that they were going to increase that cost to $1,000, per test for over 10 years? That's the sticker that is in the window for this bill. Anyway, not a real thing. But what is a real thing? Speaker? Oh, hold on. Is the Auditor General's 2023 Value for Money audit regarding driver training and examination. The Ministry of Transportation is responsible for protecting the public by restricting the privilege of driving to those who demonstrate that they have the necessary knowledge, skills, and experience to drive safely. A 10-year contract with the service provider to deliver driver examination services ended in 2023. The ministry intended to perform an extensive evaluation of service delivery options. This is from the Office of the Auditor General regarding their value for money audit. Fun fact, that 10-year contract that the government was committed to reviewing got extended without the extensive review. But why this matters, according to the Auditor General, ensuring that novice drivers acquire effective training and pass the ministry road test requirements before receiving a driver's license is a crucial step in keeping Ontario's roads safe. And they highlight a number of very concerning challenges faced in the sector. They have outlined that the ministry allows novice drivers who complete the optional beginner driver education program to choose to shorten their 12-month wait period for the city and road test by up to 4 months. They found that people who shortened their wait period had collision rates that were on average 30% higher than drivers who completed the program but did not shorten their wait period. 11 out of 14 driving schools that were sampled allowed the students to shorten or even abandon their in-car training, but still issued their students beginner driver education certificates. What? How many people in this room are comfortable with that? That people who don't do the in-car training are still issued their beginner driver education certificates? Well, that was highlighted in the value for money, and this government is ignoring that. There's a chance in this bill, as we're talking about driver tests and driver training, to do something to actually address some of what has been highlighted in the Auditor General's report. And it makes for interesting reading. For the folks at home, Driver Training and Examination 2023 Value for Money Audit. Look it up. But I will share here from the Driving Instructors Alliance. They have written to urgently request your assistance in raising critical questions concerning the government's failure to implement the Auditor General of Ontario's recommendation on driver training and examination. This issue is of significant public safety concern, and immediate action is essential to protect all Ontarians on our roads. So their recommendations and their concerns, again, these are driving instructors, the people who teach folks how to drive safely on our roads, who then go to the private testing center, which is run by Serco, which I'll talk about, and they get a shortened version of the test, which I'll talk about, that they are not held to the same standards that probably many of the folks in this room were, because things have changed. And they are flagging. They, as instructors who see it up close and personally, are sounding the alarm. That should be enough for anyone in this room to pay attention. They have highlighted novice drivers from urban areas who take their road tests at rural or suburban centres are involved in collisions at rates 16 to 27% higher than those tested in urban settings. For example, drivers from Brampton who tested outside the city had a collision rate 22% higher than those who took their tests within the city. Could you ask why the government has not monitored this dangerous trend and what immediate steps it will take to address these safety implications? Well, the answer is the government has not addressed them. Their next question: to address a COVID-19 road test backlog, the ministry reduced G, or highway test requirements. These lowered standards remain almost 2 years later without any proper evaluation of the safety impacts. Ask the government why the full G test requirements have not been reinstated to ensure road safety, and why changes were made without a thorough safety review. That was to clear the backlog, folks, and we'll talk more about that. They've also said the ministry awarded a new contract to Plenary Serco without a competitive process, despite years of performance issues and disputes over penalties. Furthermore, the ministry paid over $19.2 million to extend operating hours and cover costs that should have been the service provider's responsibility. Could you ask the government why a non-competitive contract was awarded under these circumstances, and why the ministry has borne costs that should have been the responsibility of the service provider? I could ask. They also flagged drivers with multiple suspensions have a fatal collision rate 6 times higher than the general driver population, yet only 5% of these high-risk drivers completed retraining in 2022. Will the government implement mandatory retraining for drivers with repeat suspensions? And what other measures will be taken to address the alarming safety risk? Well, the answer, Speaker, appears to be no. So, as they have said, these are not just policy gaps, they're pressing road safety issues that affect all drivers in Ontario. I urge you to hold the government accountable and ensure these concerns are addressed urgently in the interest of public safety. And that's from the Driving Instructors Alliance. Speaker, I had met with the Ontario Driving Instructors Association, so a different group. These are associations of driving instructors who are so concerned about what they're seeing that they are banding together and forming their own associations. That shortened process that we talked about, it's interesting because Serco runs this. It's a private company that does the road tests. They have doubled their revenue. So it's still $90 for that test because the government, as we've talked about, has decided not to increase the fees, and so they're pretending that that is a saving. So it's still $90, but it's more business for Serco because the revenue has gone up. They can do now 2 30-minute tests in an hour, or however long it is. But they can do twice as many tests. They're doubling their money. So the government isn't increasing the fees for people, but Serco, the private company, is still doing the reduced, shortened tests and making bank. That's alarming. They also highlighted there are people teaching illegally in their own private cars, that they see insurance fraud on a regular basis, that they have safety concerns because to be a licensed driving instructor you have to pass a vulnerable sector check, and there are a lot of folks running after our programs who are skipping that step. It shouldn't be that hard to get a vulnerable sector check. It isn't hard for the people who have done it. It might be hard for someone who should not be alone in a vehicle with young people ostensibly teaching them how to drive. That is something that has been flagged for this government, and that is not a protection that we see in this bill. Speaker, moving on to another part of Schedule 4, the Highway Traffic Act. This is where we've seen a lot of interest in the broader community. So this section of the bill requires prescribed municipalities to obtain ministry approval to install a bike lane if the bike lane would reduce the number of lanes available for motor vehicle traffic. The ministry may consider whether the bike lane would unduly diminish the orderly movement of motor vehicle traffic. The ministry may require prescribed municipalities to provide prescribed traffic information relating to an existing bike lane. Speaker, for a government that claims to be all about cutting red tape, it makes no sense for the government to place new regulatory burdens on municipalities who are in a much better position than the MTO or this Premier to make decisions about local transportation matters, in this case about bike lanes. The province's goal should be to improve overall traffic, not just motor vehicle traffic. Bikes take up less space on the road, and if we can make cycling a safe and convenient choice for people of different ages and abilities, it will get cars off the road and improve overall traffic. But as written, this bill could ban even well-used bike lanes because bike traffic is not considered. The only thing that counts in this bill is motor vehicle traffic. So this legislation is not about improving traffic. It seeks to pick a culture war for political purposes that puts the lives and safety of vulnerable road users at risk, including kids, people who can't afford a car, anyone who uses those bike lanes. It is about a government dictating that people who choose to get around by car are worth less than those who choose to drive a car. Bike lanes already face enormous political barriers, and the bike lanes installed on municipal roads represent only a tiny fraction of the total road space dedicated to motor vehicles. It is ridiculous to suggest that municipalities are casually installing bike lanes everywhere without a thought. I love being heckled by folks. Anyway, thank you, Speaker. Reducing bike lanes and increasing mayhem is what we're doing with this bill. The Premier and Minister are taking on bike lanes and wanting a culture war with an election on the horizon. They seem intent on picking this fight that they think will be popular. But it isn't popular with everyone, and for very real and rational reasons. Municipalities know how to plan, and plan what they know, their communities. I would have to ask why municipalities are having their decisions overruled. Speaker, there are a lot of people interested in this bike lane conversation. Here's an article from the Toronto Star. the Premier's bill to limit new bike lanes will also review existing ones. So, as written, under sweeping new legislation, the Highway Traffic Act is being amended to say the ministry may review existing bicycle lanes and municipalities must receive provincial approval before installing new lanes. The province would cover any costs incurred by municipalities to remove bike lanes, they say, and also, quote, when considering whether to approve the design for the construction of a bicycle lane, the ministry may consider whether it would unduly diminish the orderly movement of motor vehicle traffic, the bill states. Whether it would unduly diminish the orderly movement of motor vehicle traffic. As I had mentioned, this is not about overall traffic. This is strictly about motor vehicles. Speaker, the Association of Municipalities of Ontario have criticized this as a, quote, significant overreach into municipalities' jurisdiction. Toronto Mayor Olivia Chow has also pushed back at the usurping of municipal authority, and it reads, quote, ripping up our roads to remove bike lanes will make congestion worse. And she also has said that the province should tackle gridlock by completing the delayed Finch West and Eglinton LRTs. Yeah, imagine that. Speaker, the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, or AMO, are well known to all of us as legislators in this room, and many of the members in this House have been well connected to AMO and also have been leaders in their own home municipalities. So I'm sharing this press release. The province to introduce legislation governing bicycle lanes. According to government news release, municipalities would be required to demonstrate that the proposed bike lanes won't have a negative impact on vehicle traffic. And as AMO has said, bicycle lanes are an essential element of urban transportation planning and road safety. Requiring provincial approval would be a significant overreach into municipal jurisdiction. Based on local knowledge and community input, municipalities develop transportation plans that balance traffic flow with planning priorities like active transportation, multimodal transportation, and environmental and health protection. AMO is not aware of any consultation with municipalities regarding bicycle lanes or of the evidence the province considered in its decision. It is unclear how the Ministry of Transportation will be in a better position than municipalities to make decisions about local transportation matters. Rather than micromanaging bike lanes, the Ministry of Transportation could focus on accelerating its own approval processes to help support new housing. AMO goes on to say, there have been recent examples of unintended consequences when the province has tried to take over local decision-making. We urge the province to respect local decision-making when considering transportation improvements and not repeat its mistakes of the past. Well, Speaker, those are clear words. I'm going to paraphrase, and what I read was that AMO is saying, stay in your lane and leave municipal planning decisions to municipal planners. But again, this is a government that is determined to move forward at all costs, and when AMO says that they are unaware of the evidence or the consultation process, that would suggest to anyone paying attention that the government is skipping steps and just doing whatever they think it will be popular instead of what indeed is needed. Speaker, this is from an article. They're coming out. The Premier has said he will remove bike lanes from 3 Toronto streets. This article says, as he left a progressive Conservative caucus meeting at Queen's Park on Tuesday, the Premier told Global News his government has already identified 3 routes to be targeted for removal. Asked whether the government wanted certain criteria to be met before the removal of those lanes, the Premier said, quote, no. The Premier suggested the decision was a done deal. As he said, they're coming out, he told Global News. The comments appear to presuppose the outcome of a process that's still being developed at Queen's Park. Shocking. The legislation still has to be debated and reviewed by a parliamentary committee before becoming law. The Premier, as reported here, has already told us what's happening. So I guess it doesn't matter what we do in this room. The Premier's got bike lanes on his Christmas list. Separately, though, the Minister of Transportation has emphasized that the decision over what lanes would move ahead and which would be removed would be decided through a rigorous process of regulations. Left hand, right hand, guys. The Minister of Transportation, office has said regulations will be, quote, completed over the coming months, end quote, and that they will include an outline of data and submission requirements, timelines, approval criteria, and information sharing details, end quote. So the Minister's office has said there's going to be a process, an approval criteria, timelines, all of that, and the Premier has said, no. I will never, ever, ever, ever be a member of this particular government, and I'm not unhappy about that. But Speaker, I have to wonder what some of the members think as they walk through the halls as government members, knowing that they've got ministers and premiers saying one thing, saying another, maybe at odds or maybe just not communicating. It is quite interesting because it looks like chaos from the outside, eh? So I don't know what it's like being on the inside. When we are government, we will have a different kind of process, I'm sure. Okay, Speaker, continuing on about the bike lanes, people care about getting around their communities safely. They care about well-planned, safe infrastructure. And I have a letter here from Matt Alexander, who has written, please do not let this government get away with legislating restrictions on bike lanes. I know their new proposal is mainly a distraction, but if they go through with this, people will die. Their proposal is government overreach. It's anti-democratic. It rejects the authority of local municipal governments to make decisions for their own constituents, and it represents red tape, which this government claims to be against. Matt goes on to say, most people in Ontario have no issue with bike lanes, and most people in Ontario want to feel okay about their children or parents riding a bike. I grew up in Oshawa, and I loved riding my bike in my neighborhood as a kid, but I never felt safe riding a bike to go anywhere as a teenager because we didn't have any bike lanes. This Premier's anti-bike lane bill isn't just about punishing Toronto. It will also punish people in Oshawa who want to get around without their car. You know how jammed up the roads are. The only solution to those kinds of traffic jams is giving people a viable alternative to driving. Bike lanes provide that alternative. I really hope you will stand up and defend municipalities that want to give people an alternative to driving so that the people who really need to drive have fewer drivers clogging up the roads. Please do not let them get away with this. They will get people killed. And that's from Matt Alexander, a constituent in Oshawa. There are a lot of folks paying attention to this bike lane attack. It doesn't make sense. It's attacking municipalities' right to plan for their communities. The end of last week, there were hundreds of people out on the lawn protesting this bill, folks who support bike lanes. And not everyone out there was a bicycle rider. There are a lot of folks that have wheelchairs, have different devices, that are pedestrians, people who use bike lanes so that they are protected from the cars, so that they can get around and not be part of that traffic jam. Here's a letter from Henry Zongaro, who is writing as a cyclist, and he has said, "Dear Minister, I felt compelled to reach out to you regarding your opinion piece, quote, bike lanes only make sense in the right places. I have to agree that bike lanes only make sense in the right places. However, I disagree with your opinion that they only belong on quieter streets and neighbourhoods. As an example, I live near Bayview and Eglinton in the riding of Don Valley West and work in Markham. I would love to be able to ride to work, but instead I use public transit. The great difficulty in making that trip by bicycle is getting past major highways, like the 401, 404, and 407. The way neighbourhood streets are laid out in many parts of the Toronto area makes it very difficult to navigate them for longer distance travel that cuts across several neighbourhoods. The only straightforward solution is to make accommodations for bicycles on major streets. That will encourage more people to take advantage of those lanes more often, getting more of them out of their cars, even if it's only for 8 or 9 months per year. Placing bicycle lanes on quiet streets and neighbourhoods will ensure they will only be used for leisure riding, which is mostly how those streets are already used. Rather than imposing a one-size-fits-all, top-down solution that keeps commuters in their cars, I feel you should leave it to municipalities to decide where bike lanes make the most sense. They are closer to their communities and are better placed to determine where bike lanes should be placed. Regards, Henry Zongaro." Pretty sure all of the government members, well, all members in this House are getting letters like that on this bill. Speaker, there's an organization called Friends and Families for Safe Streets, and Jess Speaker has been to the legislature on various occasions to speak about vulnerable road users. My Bill 15, she has spoken about different initiatives that would keep people safe and protected, and she had some thoughts on this bill, and I won't share them all, but I know she'd be very happy to share them with each individual member who's curious. As Jess has said, this will only serve to get innocent people killed. Ripping out bike lanes will not improve overall car congestion since they're on only 4% of Toronto streets. This is a brutal slap in the face to every family whose loved one was killed in a car crash and to every survivor of a car crash. She has asked, doesn't the ministry have to produce documentation proving that bike lanes cause car congestion? Well, that's impossible because car congestion is caused by too many cars, and bike lanes get people out of cars. No restriction on what type of street this evaluation would apply to. There's no reason to think that this government will approve a single piece of future cycling infrastructure. If they have such a hate on bike lanes, there's certainly no guarantees that that won't continue. And as she has said, the Minister of Transportation and his office staff can't possibly have the capacity to actually do these reviews, both of applications for new bike lanes and of existing infrastructure. They can't get anything done. Example, Eglinton Crosstown. Literally every LRT project everywhere is delayed. Highways are riddled with potholes. Wasteful 401 widening already just as clogged with cars as it was before. GO service is not frequent enough to be useful for most people. What happened to the all-day Kitchener-Toronto GO service? TTC is starved for operational funding and needs new trains. There's no actual use case or justification for any of those new highways to enable the Greenbelt giveaway to developers, on and on and on. So why do they think that they have time for this? Have they been sitting on their hands the last 6 years? Jess has lots of thoughts on this, and understandably. Speaker, the Premier has been calling for data. Well, it exists, right? That they're making things up about their bike lane claims. Many examples of bike lanes that ensure vulnerable road users are protected while they travel our roads, whether wheelchair, pedestrian, cyclists. The Runnymede to Shaw segment of the Bloor bike lane is one of Toronto's busiest. It's used by thousands of people every day.
Sorry to interrupt the member. I'm going to ask the member to withdraw her comment.
I will withdraw my comment. Thank you. But I would like to know if the ministry will provide the evidence, actual evidence, not anecdotes, to back up its claims that bike lanes are impeding overall traffic. Why does this bill focus only on motor vehicle traffic and not overall traffic? As written, this bill would ban even well-used bike lanes because bike traffic is not considered. This bill should be about safety first, especially for vulnerable road users. But despite everything we've heard about safe roads in Ontario, we aren't doing enough to make sure people can be safe on their travels. The MPP from Ottawa Centre rode his bike from Ottawa to Toronto. He stopped along the way in Oshawa. And we heard from folks about near misses, the importance of well-planned infrastructure, injury, death, and loss of loved ones. We heard the need for vulnerable road user legislation to keep folks safe that use our roads. Ben Spur made a comment on social media that is worth discussing. He said the provincial legislation will require cities to demonstrate that bike lanes that remove car lanes won't have an adverse impact on vehicle traffic. The point of the Parkside bike lanes is to slow car traffic. There have been almost 1,500 crashes there in 10 years and 3 deaths. So those bike lanes are actually part of traffic calming, which is planned to keep people safe. This bill suggests that anything that impedes motor vehicle traffic flow is potentially on the chopping block. Well, these bike lanes are actually to keep people safe and are meant to slow traffic. Anyway, it's just such limited understanding. But yeah, sometimes bike lanes are installed as traffic calming measures, right, to increase safety. Everyone who uses our roads or work on our roads without the protections of a steel cage should be considered to be vulnerable. Traffic cops, pedestrians, flagmen on construction sites, roadside construction workers, cyclists, bikers, paramedics at a collision, tow truck operators, lots of people find themselves on our roads outside of vehicles, and ensuring that they are factored into plans and legislation should not be too much to ask. Speaker, it is amazing how one can go through an hour in what feels like 20 minutes. I think that the bike lanes conversation is going to be had with enthusiasm in this room. All of us have very full inboxes right now, people who are quite concerned about this government's overreach into the municipalities' planning abilities when it comes to bike lanes. But I'm going to take, as the critic, I'm going to take a moment and also mention that Schedule 1 of this bill, the Building Broadband Faster Act, this government already has quite extraordinary power to expropriate property and conduct site inspections. I'm not convinced that this part of the bill is what is in the way of the government getting broadband spending out the door. Everyone needs high-speed internet in this day and age. This year, the government is budgeting $1.3 billion for broadband infrastructure. That's a big number, eh? However, This government has failed to spend the vast majority of its broadband infrastructure budget for as long as this program has existed. Last year, the ministry budgeted $663 million for broadband, but only spent $93. The year before that, the ministry budgeted $693 million for broadband, but only spent $70. And the year before that, the ministry budgeted $406 million, but only spent $15 million. Broadband has been a priority for New Democrats because it matters to all Ontarians. We've tried to include words like rural, northern, First Nations community. We've tried to include them as priorities in government legislation to make it clear that they should not be left behind, but all of those amendments have always been defeated. Broadband is an essential service. We have to remember that people deserve it, and it's not going to happen if this government doesn't spend to get broadband out the door. So, Speaker, this bill, reducing gridlock, saving you time, doesn't reduce gridlock and isn't saving us time. We need a government to actually plan things well for the improvement of Ontario. This bill is not getting us there. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you. It is now time for questions. I recognize the Minister for Public and Business Service Delivery.
Thank you, Speaker. And my question to the member for Oshawa concerns her earlier comments on Bill 212 and the environmental assessment reference. As acting or alternate Minister of the Environment, Conservation and Parks, I wanted to ask the member for Oshawa, does the member understand, of course, that we've had, since 2007, dozens of studies and reports on 413, and that this government is being guided right now by those studies and reports, in addition to the accelerated environmental assessment process. So that is because, does the member understand this, we believe you can do both. You can be good stewards of the environment while building the Ontario of tomorrow. Does the member understand that that is the intent behind this bill?
Thank you. Response?
Thank you. I'm going to share from the Environmental Defence's letter to Minister Guilbeault as they're requesting an impact assessment, that they had said the 413 project is now proposed to be exempted from the provincial EA process and would entail early works, which would include bridge crossings that would impact values under federal jurisdiction. Speaker, this government does not have a good track record on environmental protections, and certainly with this PEP project, there's no exception. Because of the proposed exemption, it appears that there would never be a final report on the environmental impacts of the project carried out by Ontario prior to construction of early works, and that a final report may never be required to assess fish habitat, species at risk, migratory bird impacts. Mitigation measures have not been proposed for federal effects. There has been no detailed public assessment of the potential impacts on species at risk, fish or fish habitat or migratory birds for the project along the preferred route. Certainly, we have not seen any evidence of environmental protection or priority.
Thank you. Next question. The member from Sudbury.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member for Oshawa for her debate. She spoke at length about how there's a bit of a culture war about bike lanes and getting people frustrated with bike lanes. A lot of this, when we talk about gridlock, what a lot of people see, especially when I drive to Northern Ontario, is the incredible gridlock along the 401. She had mentioned the Ontario NDP's opposition motion to allow transport trucks to go onto the 407, thereby freeing up the 401. If she'd like to expand on what that would do, how it would accomplish, and also if she can make a comment of how many bike lanes are on the 401, slowing down traffic on the 401.
Thank you. Response.
Thank you. Certainly, there aren't any bike lanes slowing down traffic on the 401. And not to be too flip about this, but with their 401 like underground subterranean tunnel plan, I wonder if their plan is to maybe they can make the top level be all bike lanes. I have no idea what they're doing. I don't think they do either. Listen, the 407 is underutilized. We can talk about the time that the plane landed and whatnot, but on any given day, it's underutilized. We could be differently approaching this. We could be problem solving, but the government is like, shh, don't use the word 407. We've made promises about the 413. But this is something that could help people today and tomorrow to redirect trucks from the 401 to the 407 by removing the tolls. Everyone thinks this is a good idea. I would guess that the government members also think it's a good idea, but they're not saying anything because right now the only thing that they're allowed to talk about, it would appear, is the 413.
Questions. I recognize the member from Essex.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think that it is fair to say, at least I'm going to say it's fair to say, that this government has an incredible record with respect to the building and advancement of infrastructure in the province of Ontario, particularly when it comes to highways. Right in my own riding of Essex, we have the expansion of Highway 3 from 2 lanes to 4 lanes, which is necessary to get goods and services to market. In particular, goods which are leaving Leamington, passing through Essex County and going to the border to get to markets in the United States. Markets as far away as places like southern states and even Florida. I think that's really important. I think it's important that the steps taken in this bill that's before the legislature today are important steps, particularly to get our goods to market. And as I've said, in our area, it's important for those goods to get to the border. And you get to the border using the highways that are being expanded by this government. And so my question to the member across is, would she like to be part of that? Would she like to be part of getting the goods to the border and expanding our markets, especially agribusiness markets, which are reaching something in the neighborhood of $26 billion of exports today?
Response.
Thank you very much, Speaker. As someone who is very excited about getting goods to market and keeping the traffic flowing, reducing traffic, as someone who fought deliberately and tabled the private members bill that then became government legislation to remove the tolls from the 412 and 418, as someone who has called for the removal of truck tolls from the 401 so that they, truck tolls from the 407 to move trucks from the 401 to the 407 in order to reduce gridlock, as somebody who absolutely thinks that that portion of the 407 that the province still owns, I would like a fair deal for Durham Region. So, as someone who does indeed support all of these things, I'm so disappointed that in this bill, this government is again refusing to actually reduce gridlock, get the trucks off the 401 and onto the 407, that they voted against the NDP opposition motion. So, you know, we can talk a good game, but if you're not willing to do the work, then we stay stuck in traffic. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? The member from Sudbury.
Thank you, Speaker, and thank you as well to the member from Oshawa for her debate. Every time I hear this, our House talk about highways, I'm reminded that for the last 6 years, no action has been done on Highway 69. There are 68 kilometres that are still unpaved. The Chamber of Commerce is calling for it. The people from Ontario, from Sudbury are calling for it. Northern Ontario who want to expand businesses are calling for it. We know that people are killed every year on Highway 69, yet every year since Surge took power, there's been no action on the highway. If they're so serious about expanding the economy and delivering goods and services and protecting the people of Ontario, why isn't Highway 69 a priority?
Good question.
Thank you. Response.
Highway 69 absolutely should be a priority for this government. I've been coming to this place now for 10 years, and it has been a priority that has constantly been raised by the NDP and by the Northern members. Not just about traffic flow or getting people moving, but about safety. If this government isn't willing to tackle Northern roads, either the infrastructure side, or we just saw on CBC Marketplace an expose of just how bad things are with truck driver training, fraud in that sector. We're not ensuring that Northern roads are safe by any measure. There's a lot of work that could be prioritized in this bill. Again, it's a missed opportunity, but hopefully behind the scenes the government actually cares and is doing something, but I see no evidence of that. And when it comes to Highway 69 or other provincial roads, this government really is falling short.
Thank you. Next question, the Associate Minister for Energy-Intensive Industries.
Thank you very much, Speaker. And I want to thank the member for Oshawa for her participation this morning to debate, and have had the privilege now of going to the members' riding a couple of times over the past few months, and appreciate the representation that she brings to this chamber for that place. But, Speaker, I want to ask the member, you know, I recall not that long ago, I guess 5 or 6 years ago, when we came forward with the plans for the Ontario line. And I remember the leader of the opposition in those days and the members opposite saying essentially, you know, this is a plan that's been drawn on the back of a napkin. It will never happen. We'll never see the Ontario line come to fruition here in Ontario. And of course, we see that construction well underway. We see the tunneling completed for most of those aspects of the Ontario line. And since that time, we've come forward with a number of significant infrastructure projects in every corner of this province to ensure that we're building bigger, that we're building better. And so my question, because none of these have been supported by the NDP, is when did the member opposite and the NDP stop daring to dream big?
Thank you. Response.
Thank you, Speaker. And I appreciate the question. And, he started out by saying nice things about the hard work that I invest in my community. And I will say that member has come to Oshawa a couple times, and I have thanked him for his attention and also invited him not to break anything when he's in town. But, Speaker, we dream big on this side, but we also support those who make plans to make it happen. When we look at the mess that is Metrolinx and we see all sorts of commitments and we see there's no follow-through, we see some weird love affair with Phil Verster, maybe it's the cute accent, I don't know, but they are not holding Metrolinx to any standard of actually getting things accomplished. So this is a member who is highlighting projects that I'm eager to see something finished in this province and finished well. And I will continue to have hope, but I'm not optimistic. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you.